The clothes Jesus probably wore, close your eyes for a moment. Picture a dusty road under a burning Judean sun, sandals slapping against stone, the smell of wool, sweat, and sun-baked earth. Now picture the man walking that road, not the man in golden robes from your childhood paintings. Not the flowing white gown with a blue sash. The real man. The real man. What if almost every image you've ever seen of Jesus Christ is wrong? Stay with us. What you're about to discover might change the way you picture him forever. Introduction. For 2,000 years, artists have painted him in silk-like fabrics, glowing robes, colors fit for a king. But Jesus was not a king, not in the way the world understood kings. He was a carpenter's son from a small village in Galilee, a working man. A man who walked, sweated, and wore clothing built for survival, not for portraits. To understand who Jesus really was, we have to strip away the paintings, the stained glass, the Hollywood costumes. We have to go back to the dust of first-century Judea, back to the marketplaces, the looms, the sheep pastures, because the clothes a man wore back then said something. They said who you were, where you came from, what you could afford. And they might tell us something about Jesus that the Gospels never spell out directly. Scene 1. The village of Nazareth. Nazareth was small, poor, overlooked. Some scholars believe it had no more than a few hundred residents during Jesus' childhood. No grand markets, no wealthy merchants, just simple homes built from limestone and families who worked with their hands to survive. In a place like this, clothing wasn't fashion, it was function. Historians believe that most Galilean families, including likely Jesus' own, wore garments made from wool or linen, whichever was available and affordable. Wool came from sheep raised nearby. Linen came from flax, woven by hand, thread by thread, often by the women of the household. There were no factories, no mass production. Every piece of clothing was made slowly, by human hands, sometimes taking weeks to complete a single garment. Imagine that. A tunic Jesus wore may have taken his mother, Mary, days of quiet, patient labor to create. But something unexpected happened as this simple boy grew. He became a teacher, a healer, a man crowds followed into the wilderness. And what he wore during that ministry may reveal more than we realize. Scene 2. The tunic, the garment, against his skin. Picture the base layer of Jesus' clothing. The tunic. This was not the flowing white robe you've seen in films. It was a simple rectangular piece of fabric, sewn at the sides, with holes for the arms and head. Historians call it a chiton. Most tunics in this era were undyed. Why? Because dye was expensive. Only the wealthy could afford vibrant purples or deep reds. For a working man like Jesus, the tunic was likely a natural, earthy color. Cream, pale brown, faded beige from the sun. It probably reached to the knees or lower, allowing him to walk long distances across rocky terrain without the fabric dragging in dust and dirt. And here's something few people notice. Archaeologists have discovered ancient textile fragments in the Judean desert near the Dead Sea, dating back to this exact era. These fragments reveal something fascinating. Most were simple, undyed, practical, not fit for a king, fit for a servant. And Jesus called himself exactly that. A servant to all. Scene 3. The outer robe, protection from the world over the tunic. Jesus likely wore a second, larger garment and outer robe, sometimes called a himation, or in Hebrew culture, a cloak. This wasn't just clothing, it was survival gear. At night, temperatures in the Judean hills could drop sharply. This outer robe doubled as a blanket, something to wrap around the body while sleeping under open skies, especially during his long journeys through the wilderness. The Bible even reflects how sacred this garment was. In Jewish law, if someone borrowed your cloak as security for a debt, it had to be returned before nightfall. Why? Because for the poor, this cloak was the difference between warmth and freezing exposure. This tells us something powerful. Jesus' clothing wasn't decoration. It was protection. It was dignity. It was survival. And this robe carried something else, fringes, sacred threads called tzitzit, worn by observant Jewish men as a reminder of God's commandments. Some scholars believe this detail is more important than we realize, because in one gospel account, a suffering woman reached out not to touch Jesus' hand, not his face, but the edge, the fringe of his garment, and something extraordinary happened. Scene 4. The moment that changed everything. Pictured the crowd. Bodies pressing in from every direction, dust rising with every step. A woman, exhausted after years of suffering, pushes through the chaos. She doesn't ask for permission. She doesn't call his name. She simply reaches. Her fingers brush against the fringe of his cloak, the tzitzit, the sacred thread marking him as a devout Jewish man. And in that instant, something shifts. This tiny detail reveals something extraordinary. The very clothing meant to represent obedience to God became the connection point for a miracle. It wasn't about magic fabric. It was about faith reaching toward the presence of God, wrapped in ordinary wool. This is the paradox at the heart of this story. A man dressed like a laborer, a garment built for warmth and survival, and yet, power moving through it. Scene 5. The sandals and the belt beneath his robes. Jesus' feet were likely protected by simple leather sandals, flat soles strapped to the feet with leather cords, designed for walking on rocky, uneven paths. Historians estimate Jesus walked thousands of miles during his ministry alone. From Galilee to Jerusalem, through deserts, across hillsides, his sandals would have been worn, cracked, clotted in dust, and around his waist, a belt or sash used to gather up the tunic when walking or working, keeping the fabric from dragging and slowing him down. This detail matters more than people think, because in the Gospel of John, Jesus knelt before his disciples, wrapped a towel around his waist like a servant, and washed their dusty, sandal-worn feet, the same feet that had walked the same dusty roads he had walked. A king would never do this, but a servant would. Emotional peak. Now picture the final days. Jerusalem. The narrow stone streets. The weight of what's coming pressing down like a storm about to break. Soldiers surround him. His outer robe, the one that may have carried the sacred fringes, the one that may have warmed him through cold desert nights, is stripped away. Historical records describe how soldiers would divide a condemned man's garments among themselves. It was common practice. Expected. Routine. But this time, something different happens. His tunic, the one possibly woven by his mother's hands, thread by patient thread, was seamless, woven in one piece, without a single seam. The soldiers refused to tear it. Instead, they cast lots for it, gambling for a piece of cloth spun in quiet love, now soaked in the blood of the man who wore it. Think about that. The clothing of a servant, made by loving hands, worn on dusty roads, wrapped around suffering bodies, now stripped away in his final hours. Every thread carried a story, and every thread was about to become part of the greatest story ever told. Ending, we may never know the exact color of Jesus' tunic. We may never know exactly how his sandals were tied, or how faded his robe had become after years on dusty roads. Historians are not certain of every detail. Scholars still debate the exact styles, the exact fabrics, but what we do know is enough to change how we see him. He didn't dress like royalty. He dressed like the poor, like the forgotten, like the people he came to save. His clothing wasn't a costume of power. It was a uniform of humility, and maybe that's the deepest truth hidden in these threads. Because a man who wore the same rough wool as fishermen, farmers, and servants was, according to billions of people across history, also somehow more than a man. The clothes were ordinary. The man wearing them was not. And perhaps that's the detail worth remembering the next time you picture him. Not gold, not silk, not glowing light, just dust, wool, and a servant's heart wrapped in the simplest of threads.